Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate you guys watching. And hit like and subscribe and try to make the channel grow. We did get over 20,000, yay, subscribers, which took us forever to get there. And it was funny because we were right like 10 short of 20,000 for like a month. We just couldn't get over. And then finally, I guess they had to let us over. So anyway, we are over 20,000, which gives me all sorts of different kinds of capabilities here on YouTube. And so today I want to get right to it because I got someone I've been wanting to talk to for 15 years, something like that. And that is Bart Sibrel. Bart Sibrel is a filmmaker, a writer. His new book is Moon Man. He did a funny thing happened on the way to the moon. He is part of what I call the second wave of people who were examining the idea that possibly we didn't go to the moon in the Apollo program. The first wave was, of course, Bill Kaysing and Ralph Rene, both people I knew and talked on the phone extensively with, and I know you did too, Bart. And then the next wave, which is interesting because the first wave was scientists, more or less. The second wave are filmmakers. So it's Bart, it's me, and it's David Percy, who are all filmmakers. We're kind of the leading edge of the next wave of questioning this. And I think it's interesting that the next wave is, the second wave is all filmmakers, because we know what we're looking at. And you can't fool us. It's very difficult to fool someone who's in the same profession as they're using as their medium to fake the whole thing. Hey, Bart, how are you?
I'm doing good, Jay. How about yourself?
I'm good. Bart's probably the most famous for getting punched by Buzz Aldrin after asking him to swear on the Bible. And Buzz is known for his temper. And I gotta say, you really were the warrior, dude, man. You just went right into the mouth of the beast. Your video of your confrontation with Ed Mitchell and his son, that had to be a little bit unnerving, I have to say.
Well, yeah, as you know, the guy claims he's not a violent person and then can't go 5 seconds without lying. And after he says, I'm not a violent person, he hits me. And then with my back turned to him, on top of all that, we showed him the fake photography from Apollo 11 of them faking being halfway to the moon. He started turning beet red, got angry, threw us out, threatened to shoot us. And I had left in the commotion high quality wireless microphone on him, and my camera operator inadvertently left the camera recording in the back of the rental car. So we were unintentionally recording private audio inside the astronaut's house as he discussed with his son calling the CIA to have me assassinated, which of course, if they really went to the moon and I thought otherwise, why would that be necessary? Unless of course I'm uncovering a genuine government fraud. And then why would an Apollo astronaut have in his Rolodex the CIA anyway, unless there was something fraudulent about that? And of course, we know from other people that the CIA was involved in the faking of the Apollo missions and the homicide of several astronauts. So that's just the way that it is. You know, I didn't realize that that had been recorded until like 3 months after the interview when the transcripts were being done. And when that was brought to my attention, I thought they were joking. No, and then I finally listened to it, and yes, indeed, they were talking about calling the CIA to have me killed or exposing the moon landing fraud. So what can you do?
I don't know if you know this, but I haven't really said it that many times in public. But in the mid 1990s, I got to know Dr. Robert Masters, is one of the chief hypnotherapists in the US at that time, written many books on hypnotherapy, did hypnotherapy on some of the biggest politicians and stars. And he told me over dinner one night, he said, well, I was at a conference and Ed Mitchell came up to me and said, I need help. And I said, what do you need help with? And he said, well, I can't remember what happened on the moon. And I was wondering if you could give me hypnotherapy sessions so I can recover those memories. And Bob said, yeah, sure. So he had a number of sessions with Ed Mitchell in which, now I'm thinking about it, I'm probably, you know, he shouldn't have told me any of this because this is probably potentially private information, but he told me anyway, so I'm going to tell it, that they did several sessions to try to recover Mitchell's memories of being on the moon, and they never were successful. This is a guy who's like 99% successful, and he could not recover the memories of being on the moon. And one time I was at a fairly prominent gathering, and a lot of NASA people, Apollo people at this gathering. And the person that I was at the gathering with said, hey, the psychiatrist that debriefed the astronauts is here. And I'm like, really? So, I ran up to this woman and I said, so you debriefed the astronauts after they came back from the missions? And she said, yeah, I did. And I said, so what was it like? What happened? And she looked at me, I swear she was totally sincere. She said, it's funny, I can't remember what the debriefings were like, what happened during them. So that made me start thinking that they're doing something to these people, like clockwork oranging them, is what I'm thinking. Some kind of thing where they're making sure that they can't, they can't recover anything because there's nothing to recover, is what I'm saying. There's nothing to recover. So he's mystified by why he can't remember it, or he's lying, one of the two. But Ed Mitchell is one of the weirder characters in this drama. He really is.
Yeah, I had heard from someone who dated him for a while, a famous Hollywood actress, and she said that he told her plainly he did not walk on the moon, that he only orbited the Earth. So there you go.
The famous UFO filmmaker, whose name I'm not going to use, is a good friend of mine. He told me, we went out for drinks one night after he was visiting the area here, and he said, I started talking to him about all this, and he said, well, Ed Mitchell once told me that not everything you saw was real. And, he admitted it to him. So, that's the thing. And here's the thing is, I know several people involved in the Apollo program, okay, who were nice people, but I can tell you right now, there's no doubt that everybody that worked on Apollo was a Mason. Everyone I know that worked on Apollo, I can't say everyone. All I can tell you is numerous people that I know that worked on the Apollo missions all admitted to me that they were Masons. And I find that telling, because that's another layer of secrecy that you have to, that you can't penetrate, because they have their own internal, agreements among themselves about what they say and what they don't say. So what you were doing the right thing, investigatory right thing, and you're requesting that NASA send you copies of the films and videos and photographs, and you're constantly nagging NASA for things. And then one day you got in the mail from NASA a piece of film which really kind of just blows the whole thing out of the water. And will you describe what the astronauts are doing with the window and this film, which is just an amazing film? It is the holy grail of understanding how we're being fooled.
Yeah. Now, I thought that maybe I got the tape by mistake. Bill Casing thought that I was sent it intentionally. I can tell you that was what was on the tape label and what was on the content inside were two completely different things. So either it was a clerical error or someone sent it to me intentionally. Basically, most reporters were satisfied with the first, compilation reel they got to do their story at that time, and certainly even less footage necessary to do all these anniversary commemorations. In fact, even though I specifically asked for unedited footage, all that I got was completely edited, narrated most of the time. And so I was producing the film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, under the theory that maybe, perhaps, the moon missions were falsified. And I wanted to show the drama of the launch. So I wanted basically the launch to go from T minus 1 minute through maybe T plus 30 seconds or something, but I couldn't even find that was unedited. I mean, they would jump from 60 seconds to 30 seconds to 10 seconds or whatever. And so I kept asking NASA, I want the launch unedited, at least a minute, in either film or video, and they didn't have it, which is very strange. And as I'm going through all of these tapes that I had previously kind of abandoned looking at, because I ended up getting I don't know, maybe 20 reels of footage, and after looking at the first 10, they were all like the same thing over and over and over again. I don't know, so I actually didn't look at all of them until I was looking for the launch in real time. And toward the very end, second to the last tape, I pop it in and it says in big letters, "Do not show to the public." And as usual, I hit fast forward. And as an editor, for 35 years looking at things at 20 times normal speed, I can pretty much tell what's going on. And I see what is supposed to be a black screen with a little blue ball Earth in it, as if they're looking back at the Earth halfway to the moon. And I look at the counter and I see the shot for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And I'm like, oh, this is actually unedited footage. Let me just rewind, take it from the top, and take a look at it in real time. When I did that, I heard NASA say, Goldstone says the TV picture looks great, meaning NASA wasn't even getting their direct feed from the Apollo missions, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then there's exactly a 4-second delay. And then a third track of audio appears, and you hear crystal clear someone say, "Talk." And then Neil Armstrong then answers the question from NASA. The fact is, they never left Earth orbit. So he's only like 200 miles above the Earth, and he could hear NASA immediately. And if he had answered immediately, there would be no radio delay indicating that he was in Earth orbit when he was claiming to be halfway to the moon. So what they wanted to do is stage a radio delay. So even though he heard the question from NASA immediately, he apparently had a earpiece in, and someone from the CIA counted off 1, 2, 3, 4, talk. And then he would, answer the question to give the impression of a radio delay as if he were halfway to the moon. On this tape, they explain that there's only one window that faces the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera, as it would have to be. I mean, if you're looking back at the Earth halfway to the moon, you're going to have that lens right up against the glass of the window to shoot the tiny Earth far away, right? Well, that whole thing is a lie. Because we have the unedited footage, we see that all along the cameras at the back of the spacecraft, they turned out all the lights, they blocked sunlight coming in from all the windows except one, to do this fake shot, all of which they openly talk about because they thought these conversations would be edited out. And we see that they're basically creating a 1-foot model of the Earth using a circular window. It's either a section of the Earth out of the window from Earth orbit. And there's an indication still that that might be the case, because there's cloud cover that goes the entire Earth, one cloud pattern, which is impossible if it were the whole Earth. Or, as David Percy thinks, they took a color slide of the Earth that was circular and put it over the window, and it was backlit by Earthshine. In either case, it's still a 1-foot fake model of the Earth. Even my greatest critics admit that this is fake photography. Now, that's very interesting. You have diehard people who, want to believe no matter what that the moon missions are real. They see this controversial, undeniable proof of fake photography, and they just admit, yes, it's fake photography. It's a fake Earth. They're faking being halfway to the moon, but their explanation is they're just rehearsing. And I'm like, if every minute cost $1 million and every ounce costs $10 million to lift off the ground, and there's the real Earth out the window far away, why wouldn't you just rehearse with the real Earth out the window? I mean, why would you have to fake an Earth floating in space if the real Earth were really far away out the window? So that makes no sense. And then here we are 50 years later, and they still cannot leave Earth orbit. So Jay, when I go back, this was the end of June 1999, right? Like June 30th. I'm looking at this shot and I'm looking at it, and it looks, I see like a thick window, like on a ship, a pressurized window. And I'm like, that's not the window. No, that's not the window. And then the lights come up and it's the window. And the camera has always been at the back. It never was against the glass. And I'm
Which
like,
proves that it
let me
can't be
get
a
this
person.
straight. I'm like, I want to make sure I get it correctly. I'm like, okay, they're faking being halfway to the moon. That's undeniable. This is not the Earth floating in space, which means they're not halfway to the moon. The Earth shine is incredibly bright out the window. They're in Earth orbit. And so I'm like, I want to make sure I call this correctly. They're faking being halfway to the moon. They're still in Earth orbit, and the clock shows, 2.5 days, 3 days into the flight. And I'm saying, okay, they're faking being halfway to the moon, which means they didn't go to the moon, because if you're faking being halfway, it means you can't go halfway. And they all had the same equipment. So if Apollo 11's equipment can't leave Earth orbit, it means none of them ever left Earth orbit. And Apollo 17, the alleged last mission, has more photographic anomalies probably than any of the other flights, because people had already accepted they were on the moon. So what difference does it make? I mean, you have intersecting shadows throughout that whole thing, and fake backdrops, and all this stuff. So it means they never went to the moon. And what a surprise. I mean, here we are 50 years later, and they still cannot leave Earth orbit. I mean, according to NASA, with 21st century technology, the farthest they can send an astronaut is 1,000th the distance to the moon, which is 250 miles at the space station. So what they're claiming is that they had 1,000 times greater space travel technology 50 years ago than they do today. Now, that's just the opposite of logic. How can they have better technology 50 years ago than they do today? If it weren't such a sacred cow for people, they would see the truth. I mean, I just, point out to people when they go to the South Pole, I mean, it must have taken probably 5 or 6 crews just to go to the South Pole here on Earth before they all died. I mean, they died 5 times before they made it the 6th time. So how could they do the most difficult, thing the first time, never kill anybody? I mean, think about that. And then they're doing it with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone. And then you have, there's never been a scientific milestone that happened that no one could repeat 50 years later, when in fact it should be thousands of times greater 50 years later. I mean, Lindbergh flying across the Atlantic solo in 1927, that was a big ordeal. 10 years later, there were thousands of aircraft flying over the Atlantic, that the aircraft was 100 times more complicated than the aircraft was 10 years earlier. When they blew up the atomic bomb in 1945, just 10 years later, atomic bombs are 1,000 times more powerful. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. Elon Musk in the 21st century could not land a rocket vertically until the 6th attempt, meaning with 5 supercomputers like the space shuttle. In order to land that thing, it takes 5 computers running simultaneously, and because it's so aerodynamically sensitive. Landing a rocket vertically is even more aerodynamically sensitive than the space shuttle, which is a very well-made glider. And it took him 6 tries before he did it successfully. So how could they, with 1 millionth the computing power, land a rocket vertically on a foreign environment of the moon 50 years earlier, when with all this greater technology 5 decades later, it took them 6 times before they could do it? That makes no sense. And then you have the thing allegedly sitting there on the moon for 3 days in 250 degrees, that they claim they got down to 72 degrees, on a bank of car batteries, because everyone knows 72 degrees is the ideal temperature. So they just boasted about everything. Yeah, we got it down to 72 degrees. And I'm like, well, what powered this air conditioning? 24 hours for 3 days is, car batteries. I'm like, really? If I do that in my Cadillac out in the desert, it's going to last like 10 minutes, And they should have at least said, got to 110 and they're sweating in there, at least add a little realism to it, guys.
Yeah, I mean, really, that is the layers of ridiculousness with the whole thing. And the more you drill down, the more silly it gets, and the whole idea um, that they got rid of all the telemetry data. They just taped over the tapes, got rid of them. 140,000 telemetry tapes got taped over. Just It's unbelievable. I mean, all of the
Well,
data.
yeah, I mean, the why that happened is basically Ron Howard was like executive producer on this IMAX film because he thought, that he was big into rockets since he was a kid, and he thought the moon landings were great, just like I did. His own grandfather, Ron Howard's grandfather, warned him the moon missions were fake, and he didn't listen. So he goes to NASA. He says, we're doing this 30th anniversary special. We want to project the moon landing video on this huge 120-foot wide IMAX screen. And NASA freaks out because they never gave a live feed, to the networks at the time. They deliberately degenerated it 4 generations so it looked like a fuzzy picture that no one could tell was in a television studio. So they give us a couple of days here to transfer this to HD for you. And then during that time, 2 tons of videotapes just disappeared. And I'm like, okay, they got in the same building, the original Declaration of Independence. And that's much older and a tiny little document, and they know exactly where that is. How could they lose 2 tons of videotapes between the time they were asked to be transferred to HD to when the request was supposed to be fulfilled? I mean, it has to be intentional, loss of the material. And then, just to be on the safe side, the only machine that can play back these videotapes, it's like, 2-inch videotape or something. They disassembled it and dropped all the parts in the ocean so that even if the tapes were found, no one could play them back. And it's like, why would they do that? And then they admit, I mean, you have Don Pettit, a NASA astronaut, admit that they deliberately destroyed all the technology of the moon landing program. They destroyed the hardware, the schematics, the blueprints, the electrical drawings. And I'm like, okay, let me think about this. The B-52 was invented 70 years ago, and there's still 200 of them in service. They used them in the Iraq War, because they worked so great. Why would they spend what would be an equivalent of $200 billion to make this hardware to go to the moon? And as soon as they were done, they destroy it all. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Maybe when you built the technology for the atomic bomb, you should have done that, but they didn't get rid of that. It was 1,000 times more powerful 10 years later. So if you really went to the moon and you really spent $200 billion to do it, the last thing you would do would be to destroy the hardware, the schematics, the blueprints. However, if you committed a fraud and the schematics and the blueprints could prove that it really couldn't leave Earth orbit, it really couldn't survive the temperatures on the moon, then you would destroy it to cover up the fraud. So the fact that they destroyed all of the hardware, schematic, and blueprints is actually proof of the fraud. Because if they really went to the moon, they would never do that. And if there was a fraud, that's exactly what they would do, which is proof of the fraud itself.
Yeah. I got invited to be on Art Bell show about 5-6 years ago. And the producer called me right before I went on. He said, he's brought Stanton Friedman on with him, and they're going to double team you. They're going to take you down. That's the whole goal of the show. So I'm just warning you, they're coming for you. So I got, it's like got in my battle ready to take on Stanton Friedman and Art Bell. And I swear to God, it's up on my site on Reality Check. The audio is Art Bell and Stanton are fighting me with heart and soul at the beginning of the conversation. By the end, it's me and Art against Stanton. I swear to God. Art switched sides and joined me in my argument. And Stanton, who's this physicist, I guess, I don't know what he is, he was so ill-informed about the whole thing that I was just running circles around him. And
but that's a good thing, because Jay, until about 5 years ago, I've received, like when I did I think the first time I did Coast to Coast, I got 2,000 emails in one day. And 95% of them were, how dare you say such an unpatriotic thing? I wish you were dead.
Oh, yeah.
And about 5 years ago, a literal paradigm shift.
Yep.
And now almost all the emails are, you know, thank you for opening my eyes. I used to think it was fake. Now I realize it didn't happen. I did an interview recently with a guy named Patrick Bet David on something called Valuetainment. And the guy, you know, if you read the comments in the video, all of his fans jumped on him for being disrespectful to me, not paying attention,
Yep.
whatever, because he thought the idea of, you know, we didn't go to the moon was silly. And yet, when I presented the evidence with video clips and photographs, you could see him being converted on camera. You could see the horror come over him when he realized, wow, they really didn't go to the moon. And I did an interview, I think just like a month ago, with SGT Report, and I got several emails that said they had seen me in other interviews and they have seen my films, but they were still on the fence whether we went or not until that particular interview. Why, I don't know. But the point is, people are realizing, people are waking up. So my book, Moon Man, that just came out, which people can get at Sibrel, Sibrel.com. A third of it is, you know, how and why, unfortunately, yes, the moon missions were falsified. A third of it is my kind of behind the scenes espionage adventures, including being drugged and kidnapped by the CIA with truth serum or something, escaping their custody, taking my, you know, urine sample to a lab in someone else's name, and yet the lab was broken into over the weekend, and the only thing stolen was my urine sample, because I thought I'm going to prove, you know, a journalist was drugged by the CIA with this truth serum, and they broke into a lab to prevent that, you know, coming to light. And then the last third of the book is really, you know, okay, we've established that the moon landings are fake. What does this mean? It means that these criminals are running our country. And if they will lie to every newspaper, every TV station, and tell people we're on the moon when we're not, I think they'll lie about everything. And then, not only that, we disclose in Moon Man the actual military base where Apollo 11 was filmed, the CIA code name for the project, and a list of 15 eyewitnesses who were there. And this was given to me by the military police officer, chief of security of that base, on his deathbed, because he felt guilty for participating in that fraud and wanted to give it off his chest. And he saw me on an HBO Geraldo show talking about it. He said I was sincere and he trusted me with the information to put out at a set period of time after his death. And even when I was editing the book Moon Man and confirming these details with his surviving relative, their house was broken into. They were threatened with death if they talked to me again, to the point where I had to call the press secretary at the White House, the FBI, United States Senator on an intelligence committee to get this whistleblower protection. Because even though the moon landing fraud probably killed the fewest people of all the government, you know, corruption, it's the most symbolic of their complete arrogance and disregard for the American public who they claim to represent. So that if the truth came out about this particular fraud, it would be the most devastating emotionally to the public. They waved flags, they said prayers for the astronaut, they gave them medals of honor for lying. They lied to the encyclopedias. I mean, it would just be heartbreaking, and people would go, aha, you know. And I think that's why the government is so persistent, and, you know, this constant barrage of we went to the moon on every anniversary and so forth. I mean, the way that I look at it, Jay, if they really went to the moon, then anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. So why are there hundreds of videos that took tens of thousands of hours to produce on the internet to defend the so obvious moon landings if it's so obvious, right? You know, I show one picture that proves we didn't go to the moon of shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart when sunlight is parallel. I mean, that's all the proof you need, plus the logic that we can't be more advanced 50 years ago than we are today, plus an eyewitness testimony, plus unedited footage of fake photography with the CIA heard telling him how to do it. I mean, which more proof do you need?
Well, you can't buy the videos anymore either of the moon landings. They used to have, I forget the name of the company that put out the DVDs. I own them all. They're hilarious. They're so bad. And every anniversary or whatever, Apollo 11, Apollo 14, I pull out those videos and watch, get out my popcorn and laugh at the terrible effects, the flat screen behind the astronauts. But you can't even see that. NASA won't even put up the footage on YouTube or anything. Why won't they give it away? I mean, you can't find it. And so there's a concerted effort now to hide everything. Rocket scientist Bill Woods, I don't know if you know who he is. He told me that he knew somebody in NASA, and they were ordered to destroy all the blueprints for the Saturn V, right? And he felt terrible, so he had 5 copies. He destroyed 4 of them, and then he surreptitiously took one of them home. And really, truly, just like what you just said, about 2 weeks later, knock on the door, opens the door, it's the FBI or somebody, and they say, "We think you have one of the copies. Why don't you go and get it and give it to us?" And he never told anyone. He does not know how. They knew, but they knew. And why would they do that? Why would you destroy the blueprints to the Saturn V if it's the greatest rocket ever made? You'd want to pass that on to the next generation of rocket engineers, you would think. But
yeah, I mean, there was a guy, and you know this, in Amsterdam, I guess about 10 years ago, when my film came out, he got curious, and they had in their museum this, alleged moon rock under glass for, 30 years. And he's like, let me take a look at that. So he opens the thing up, puts it under a microscope, and finds out it's a piece of petrified wood. Now, unless there are trees growing on the moon, then it's a fake, but they picked it because it looked, kind of out of the world or whatever. So doesn't anyone ask the question? I mean, if the moon rocks are fake, what about the moon missions? And then, like 5 years ago, the FBI like arrests an 80-year-old woman because she has a paperweight with the speck of moon dust in it, because it's not really moon dust, and if you put it under a microscope, it would prove that it's something from the Earth. So the FBI arrests the poor lady. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, but I think that our parents' generation, now that they're gone, I think it's becoming easier for people like us to explain some of the techniques used to fake it. And I remember in 2001, I knew that it was faked. I knew that by 98 maybe, or 99. I'd gone to a bunch of NASA facilities and looked at their archives. I've been to Houston. I've looked at all the 16mm film, and I knew something was wrong. But as a filmmaker, I couldn't understand exactly what was going on. I just knew that something was wrong. And then in 2001, I got the Blu-ray of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I put it on, and the ape scenes at the beginning, which were shot with front screen projection. And then my mind went, wait a minute, this is exactly what I'm seeing wrong with the Apollo footage and the Apollo photographs. Everything's in focus. Everything has got this flatness to it. It looks real, but not quite. And just like the ape scenes in 2001, they look real, but not quite. And then, I then discovered what they now call the Kubrick Horizontal, which is the line that goes across every image and every video outside of Apollo 11, because Apollo 11 was shot against a completely black background. They didn't add, this is another thing I want to bring up. As a filmmaker, I think you can appreciate this. If you take like a series, a long running series, or say Lord of the Rings by Peter Jackson, right? If you take Lord of the Rings and you watch it as a filmmaker, you can see there's a steady advancement through the 3 films. of effects, of production value, of the crew learning to work together. You know, you can just see it's just, there is a curve, a production value curve that goes up across anything. Walking Dead, same thing. First season was kind of low budget, then they got better, more cameras, more. Till by the sixth season, you know, there's thousands of zombies and hundreds of camera angles and highly complex lighting structures. And you see the same thing with the Apollo stuff. The first one, Apollo 11, is like low rent, low budget, no backgrounds. Then there's, you know, coincidentally, a lacuna of 2 years until Apollo 14 because of circumstances. So we don't get any footage from Apollo 12. Apollo 13 didn't go to the moon. Apollo 14, we're now getting like these giant mountains in the background, and been a real improvement in production values from 11 to 14. 15, there's a huge improvement. 16, a gigantic improvement. And by 17, we're just all out. We've got, you know, the Apennine Mountains, and we've got everything behind them. And that wouldn't be if it was for real. There wouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean, if I were on the moon, I don't think I would drive a car away from my only life support system because what if that car broke down and I'd have to walk back and I wouldn't have enough oxygen? So I don't even know that I would take that chance, but they were so arrogant. They were playing golf on the moon. And you know what their plans, Jay, were for Apollo 18, right? They were going to have a basketball team on the moon, but they thought that was pushing it a little bit too much. That's a joke there, Jay.
I like it. Yeah, it's the whole thing is it breaks down once you begin to understand that you can't. The whole idea of taking Ektachrome, 70 millimeter Ektachrome up to the surface of the moon and thinking it's not going to get fogged is incredibly stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I got an email recently, probably about a month ago, from a Kodak film expert, like he either worked at Kodak or something like that. He says, look, over 117 degrees, he knew it exactly, you know, the thing falls apart, and they're allegedly in 250 degrees, and it looks crystal clear. There's no fogging going from light to shadow, a 500-degree difference. There's no micrometeorites, you know. The whole thing is pretty much a joke. And then we find von Braun early writings. He says, first of all, if you could go to the moon, you'd have to immediately go into a cave because the body is pelted with these particles of sand traveling at 25,000 miles an hour called micrometeorites. And he said there'd be a 50% chance every 24 hours of a catastrophic failure from depressurization of your spacecraft or spacesuit, which means you couldn't walk around the moon without getting killed from a micrometeorite.
We knew this,
and yet they did it anyway, you know.
Yeah, it was the Ranger program that was counting the number of micrometeorites hitting the surface. So this is from out in orbit of the moon. They were counting it, not down on the surface. It would have been 100 times more down on the surface. And these are like traveling like 10 times faster than bullets. They're little tiny pieces of sand that are, this is why the moon has rounded hills and no sharp edges, because everything's just constantly raining down on it. And now we're not even talking about radiation, solar radiations, so many different kinds of radiation are bashing the moon because it doesn't have an atmosphere to protect it like we do. And, you know, that's another whole thing is, you know, the magical placement of Earth. You know, how did so many coincidences happen that put the Earth in the place where it is, where we have an atmosphere, like temperatures that we can exist in? That's another whole subject. But the idea that the Earth, that all these things happened on Earth to create this existence, and it all just happened by accident and coincidence, is just not true. But anyway, back to the moon because it's more important. NASA has actually made statements in the last 10 years that we can't go into deep space. They've said it several times that we cannot leave low Earth orbit. It's too dangerous. The mission to Mars would most likely, everyone would die of radiation before it ever got to Mars. The whole thing is ridiculous. It's so hot out there with radiation that we don't really appreciate it because we have all these things that absorb the radiation. But it's highly doubtful that even technology would work out beyond the Van Allen belts. Don't you think? I mean, it's just,
Well, yeah, they've
there's,
made several inadvertent admissions. There's one space shuttle crew who talks about, I think he said word for word, we hope to someday go to the moon. Isn't that interesting? Then you have the Orion spokesperson, Kelly Smith, say that the radiation belt that most people don't even know exists, it's about 1,000 miles above the Earth and extends approximately 25 to 30,000 miles beyond that. Every manned mission, space shuttle, space station, Gemini, Mercury, Soyuz, Skylab has been below that, except going to the moon. You'd have to go through it. First of all, the guy calls it deadly radiation. And then he says the technology necessary for an astronaut to travel through it and survive has yet to be invented. So then how did the Apollo astronauts go through it, you know? So I call up NASA, I say, hey, I'm a journalist, let me talk to this guy. They say, well, he doesn't talk to journalists anymore since he put his foot in his mouth there. I said, okay, well, you said you sent an unmanned probe in 2016 up into the radiation belt with 2 Geiger counters on it. May I please have those Geiger counter readings? And they said, well, that's a military secret. I'm like, really? Is the temperature of the sun a military secret? When you send a probe to Jupiter to study the atmosphere, is the amount of hydrogen in Jupiter's atmosphere a military secret? Why would a part of nature, the amount of radiation in the radiation belts that surround the Earth that you'd have to go through to reach the moon, why would that part of nature, that reading, be classified? Unless, of course, if they revealed it, it would prove the absolute impossibility for the Apollo astronauts to having gone through it, which is exactly why the information is classified. I mean, there's so much proof that the moon landings are fake, much more proof than they were real. And some people just won't accept it. I've talked to a college professor of an aerospace department, and I said, okay, what if you saw one of the Apollo astronauts on national TV tearfully confess the missions were fake? He said, I still think we went. And then when I talked to my greatest critic, I said, will you even entertain a 1% chance that they were fake? No, never. I'm like, okay, so you don't have an open mind. I mean, I used to think they were real. I had pictures up on my bedroom wall of Apollo 11 for 10 years. I saw them every day. That I saw Apollo 11 pictures and thought how great it was 3,650 times before I considered the possibility that they were fake. My film was financed by a board member of an aerospace company who builds rockets for NASA, who knows we didn't go to the moon. And I still said, well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. 7-year film project, you know, cost $1 million to produce these films. Halfway into it, I pop in the tape that says don't show to the public on the screen. I see them faking a shot right in front of your eyes, and it finally dawns on me, it looks like we really didn't go. And then I start panicking. I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I have proof that the moon landings are fake in my house. You know, the guy has a blueprint from the Saturn V rocket. They're knocking on his door. I have a videotape showing the fraud right in front of your eyes. I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done? You know, and that's when all these strange X-Files things happened that I never talked about publicly before, because it's already hard to believe that the government faked the moon landing. Didn't want to make it any more difficult, but seeing how this is my final statement on the matter, the book Moon Man, which you can get at Sibrel.com, I figured why not tell everything, tell about, you know, my point of view politically, religiously, spiritually, what I think this fraud represents, a little bit about how and why it was fake. What does it mean to our country, to our world? You know, when I saw that tape, Jay, my heart broke and I just started crying. I'm like, oh my gosh, is mankind so dark, so depraved, so juvenile that we would lie about such a thing? And that's the way it is. And that's why I was so sad. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, this is the world that I live in, that they fake the moon landing and do many other wicked things. And most people, when you boil it down, I say, you know, why won't you accept that the government lied about this? They said, well, the government wouldn't be so corrupt to lie about such an important thing. Well, what they're really saying is that they don't want to live in a world or live in a country that is that corrupt. Therefore, they won't perceive it, even though it is the case. Now, if you have mold in your house, you can act like it's not there. You can keep painting over it, and you and your family will die from it. And the same is true. You know, we have to expose the moon landing fraud. Someone in the military, the government has to come forward and confess, because if we don't, even though that will be a shocking thing, the dollar will drop, the stock market will crash, will be a temporary embarrassment to the world. That's fact. But if we don't do it, then it's like a limb that has gangrene on it, and it's going to destroy every living soul in the country and really the world, because other governments are complicit and covering up for the United States by mutual blackmail or bribery or whatever they're doing. So if we don't expose this truth like a gangrene limb, you know, it's going to kill the nation and our world. This is a struggle between good and evil, truth and lies. And it's no coincidence that this event that they lied about is what is, if true, it would be the greatest accomplishment of mankind. So what does that tell you about the nature of humanity? The greatest accomplishment of mankind is putting a man on the moon, and it's a complete fraud. And they murdered people to keep it a secret. And they used the tax-paying dollars, 1/3 of the citizens' income, to lie to them and to kill their fellow citizens to keep it a secret. Do we really want that government to be at large and in control? And they will be if we do not expose this.
Yeah, right after Fox aired their special, I think David Percy's special on how they faked it. A famous science writer, who I'm not going to say his name, but he's a very famous science writer, part of the cabal, and he's definitely a debunker. I met him at the 007, the flight that got shot down over Russia. I was at a conference about that, and that's where I met him. Big, tall guy, a major force. Anyway, he got really angry at Fox had aired that show. And I believe it was in the 90s. I can't remember. No, early 2000s. He got really mad. And so he said, NASA, give me a contract to write a book. I'm going to prove that that we went to the moon. And so we got a contract, a $20,000 contract from NASA to write a book proving that we went to the moon. And then 3 years maybe went by. And then I saw him at another conference and I said, hey, so how's that project going? And he said, I can't do it. I had to give the money back. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, they wouldn't send me anything. I asked for telemetry data. I asked for all this data to prove that they went to the moon, and they wouldn't send me anything. They wouldn't cooperate with me at all, even though they gave me money. And I said, so what does that tell you? And he came like, well, they're really unorganized. I was like, no.
Well, it means it can't be proven. I mean, if he's so interested in logic is scientific formula. According to scientific formula and well-established principles, a new scientific claim has to be independently verified and duplicated. And that has never happened with the Apollo moon missions. That's like me saying I did cold fusion 50 years ago, but for some reason I lost the technology. I can't do it today. You would obviously see the fraud of my original claim. So no one on the entire earth can duplicate this. And there is no independent verification of it because NASA has banned encroachment of the alleged landing sites by other satellites and rovers, like they own the moon. I mean, so basically they're forbidding people to go to the area where the landing sites are, because if you do, you'll see that they're not there, you know? And so that's the world that we live in.
And the pictures that they took of, I can't remember the mission recently, they did take pictures of the landing sites. And what's interesting about that is that the resolution of the landing site pictures is about 50% the resolution of all the other pictures that were taken. So that says to me that there's something going on here, Photoshop or something. And
well, I mean, that's kind of silly. That's like asking, you know, the fox for proof that he didn't steal a chicken. I mean, NASA already faked full body pictures of a person standing on the moon when they were in a military base television studio. So to
Oh
say
yeah.
that this tiny little scratch, you know, or this little shadow is somehow the lunar module shadow, I mean, that's just a joke that people say that that's proof. You know, give me a break.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up in your book, you point out that you're one of your insiders, who guy got threatened, I guess, his family. He says that they shot it at
Yeah,
at
don't say where, but we'll let people buy the book. But
someplace,
it
yeah,
was shot at a military
someplace in the
base.
United States. But
Yeah, it
that's
was
not
shot
the
here in
point
the
I want
United
to
States.
make. The point I want to make is that the dates that you give for that are very, very interesting, because Stanley Kubrick was just coming off of the finishing 2001 and getting all the publicity out for it exactly at that time. So he was done with the one film, and he wouldn't start another film for another couple of years, Clockwork Orange. And so that time period that you show, that's the perfect lacuna if you were going to grab the greatest technical filmmaker on earth and have him come out and give you advice on how to do all of this. And I really firmly believe that he did at least give the advice on how to do it, if he didn't actually do it himself. He's a hands-on guy, so my feeling is that he probably did do a lot of it himself. And but your whole description is exactly perfect. It would have to be something that big in order, the set would have to be that big in order for it to pull this off. And so you would need to do exactly what you describe in the book. I'm not going to tell anybody. I want them to buy your book and read it, because it's really good, and get it on Kindle if you want to get a fast version of it. And
it's also an audio book as well.
Yeah, I have to say that the timing that your guy says, it was like, wait, that's exactly when he would start working on something like this. He'd wait until everything was done, and he was finished with the big project. Now he knew everything. He knew how to fake it all, because he gathered all that information from making 2001: A Space Odyssey, came into the United States. I know for certain that they've created all these rumors that Kubrick didn't like to fly. That's not true. Kubrick flew to the United States many, many times. That is, I think that rumor itself was created to make it look like Kubrick wasn't involved in it at all. But we know Fred Ordway, one of the top people in Apollo, went to London to meet with Kubrick at least 100 times. Arthur C. Clarke knew all the big wigs at NASA. He was a screenwriter. You know, it's like it smells like a duck. It's a duck. And of course, Kubrick confessed it all in The Shining, which is what Room 237 is about. How every time he deviates from the Stephen King novel, he's telling you about the troubles that he had working on this project that he actually regrets starting. That's what you have to understand, is he regretted it after a while. And there's other things, you know.
Well, I mean, he has that. To me, the biggest proof of that is in The Shining, the little red rum boy. You know, he's got a custom knit shirt on that says Apollo 11, and then his last film, which is called Eyes Wide Shut, which is a perfect description of the American public asleep. He insists contractually that film open on the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon. So I think he's definitely saying the moon landings are fake. And of course, who would you hire to fake the moon landing? If you really wanted high quality work, it would have to be him, who was shooting a film about going to the moon at the time, you know. And then he has all these photographs of him at NASA, and then he got a special lens for the film Barry Lyndon, made by NASA, the first film shot under natural low light, and that lens came from NASA. So there's a lot of connections with him. I don't really talk about that much in the book because it's a little divergent, but I'd say that it's my guess that would be who did it. And that's who I would have hired. And that's probably who did fake the moon landing. I think the whole thing about his fear of flying was, it's partially true. He didn't originally have a fear of flying. I think after he faked the moon landing, he didn't want to visit America or fly to America anymore, because he thought that he might now be targeted for assassination, which I
Oh, no,
believe that could very
yeah.
well be the case.
Oh, no, I heard reports from people that he had a golf cart on his big estate in St. Albans near London, and he would drive around with a shotgun on his lap. I was like, what's that
Well,
all about?
I've talked to his wife off the record. He lived, and know a little bit about his house. I think it was in Bournemouth, England. And there's some indication that there's still some documentation available
Yep. No,
about the moon landing fraud that has yet to be released. I'll just say that.
Yep, she contacted her assistant contacted me in 2012 and said that if I'm ever in England, to drop by, she'd like to see you. And he implied to me that she had something in the house, and he was scrupulous about keeping records on everything. Stanley was. So I do believe that he was involved. There's a scene, I'm going to end this here soon, but there's a scene in the movie Being There with Peter Sellers, of course, who was in 2 of Kubrick's movies. And in the scene, there's a throwaway scene for no reason. And Peter Sellers is walking around Washington, D.C., looking at windows, shops through the windows, and it's Christmas time. And Diodato's 2001: A Space Odyssey, the jazz version, is playing on the soundtrack. And right when they go to the famous "Thus Spake Zarathustra" part, right, da da, right, Peter Sellers looks through the window at a display of Apollo 11, little toy astronauts, a toy lander, and then later I found out that the director of Being There was sick. Gotten really sick in the middle of production, and Peter Sellers was getting worried. I heard this from a third-party source. Peter Sellers was getting worried that the film was going to crash and burn, and he called up Stanley and asked Stanley to come in and finish the film for him. When I heard that, I went, yep, okay, now I got it. So, and
that was a nice little finishing touch, wasn't it?
Yeah. So anyway, Bart, you're awesome, man. You really are the pioneer. You went out into the field. I never did that. I stayed behind my desk to do my research, but you actually went out into the field and confronted these guys. And wow. And now,
well, what gave me the courage to do that is I was in the right. And this represents a struggle between good and evil. God and the devil, truth versus lies. There's a reason why the Apollo rocket was called Apollo. It means Apollyon, or the devil, or the deceiver. And that's the world that we live in. We live in a fallen world run by the chief of fallen angels. And that's the way that it is. And the Bible seems to indicate that the evil forces are going to win until divine intervention at the very end. So I would say get right with God now while there's still time.
I agree with that. And especially with what's going on over in Russia right now, we're in very, very serious trouble. And I think the weaponization of the monetary system is going to have repercussions that we don't even begin to think about. I wish they would stop it. I really do. I think that's one step too far, whether you're doing it against truckers in Canada or against workers in Russia. I think weaponizing the monetary system is not a very intelligent move. And I think we need to stop it, because now you're talking about starving people to death and things like that. And anyway, it does look like the devil's in charge, I have to admit. And it's been really great talking to you, Bart. You're an amazing guy, and everybody get his book. It's on Kindle, and you can get his films and go to Sibrel.com and see all of his great stuff, and join us. And Joe Rogan, why don't you have us on, Joe? Come on, Joe, have us on. It's fake. We know it's fake. Anyway, thanks, Bart.
But Joe is a truth seeker, and I think there's hope there. So
I do too. I hope he has you on. That would be awesome. Anyway, everybody, thanks for watching Reality Check. I'm Jay Weidner. Hit like, subscribe, and we bring you all sorts of different and unusual content. And thanks for watching. See ya.